I work front desk at a Sydney hotel, and last month an American couple checked in during a heat wave. The husband asked if we had air conditioning. I said, "Yeah, mate, but it's broken. We're just using fans and hoping for the best." He looked horrified. His wife started filming on her phone, muttering about posting reviews. I stared at them. "I'm joking. The AC works fine." Dead silence. Then he said, "Well, how was I supposed to know?" I pointed at the icy cold lobby we were standing in. He said that could have been natural temperature. We're in Sydney. In January. During a heat wave. He asked if Australians always lie like that. I told him only on Tuesdays. He wrote that down. My mate works at a Melbourne cafe. An American ordered a flat white and asked if it was like a latte but flatter. My mate said, "Nah, we just run over it with a truck first." The guy paused, then asked, "Is that sanitary?" My mate just walked away. Another American at Bondi asked a lifeguard if the sharks were vegetarian. The lifeguard said, "Only on Sundays." She thanked him and went swimming. He had to pull her out 10 minutes later when she panicked about what day it was. Australians speak fluent sarcasm. Americans translate it as terrorism. A woman from Texas walked into my friend's pharmacy in Brisbane asking for medical-grade sunscreen. He showed her SPF 50. She said that seemed low for Australia since we're closer to the sun. He agreed and said most locals use SPF 200, but it's prescription only. She asked how to get a prescription. He told her she'd need a solar consultation with a dermatologist and a government-issued sun license. She asked how long that takes. 3 to 6 months, but you can expedite for a fee. She wanted to expedite. He said the office was closed for the day, but she could come back tomorrow. She asked what Australians do in the meantime. He said, "We risk it." She looked terrified. Then his coworker walked over and asked what was happening. He said, "Just explaining our sun license program." His coworker stared at him, then at her, then said, "He's messing with you." The woman's face went red. She bought the SPF 50 and left. Posted on Facebook about Australian pharmacy hazing. 3 of her friends commented saying they'd heard about the sun licenses too. I drove an Uber in Perth, and this American bloke got in and asked why we drive on the wrong side. I told him it's because we're in the southern hemisphere, so everything's flipped. He said that made sense, like how toilets flush the other way. I said exactly. Then he asked if the steering wheel thing was hard to adjust to. I told him most tourists crash in their first week because their brains can't handle the flip. He asked if that's why rental cars are expensive. I said yeah, the insurance is brutal. He asked how Australians cope. I said we're born upside down, so our brains develop differently. He went quiet for a minute, then asked if I was serious. I said, "Mate, I'm driving right now. Does this feel flip to you?" He said he couldn't tell anymore. Gave me 5 stars though. Said I was informative. My sister works at a Darwin wildlife park. An American family came through and the dad asked if kangaroos are dangerous. She said only the males during mating season, which is why we keep them in the enclosures. He asked what they do if they escape. She said, "We negotiate." He asked if she was serious. She said, "Mate, you can't fight a roo. You just apologize and back away slowly." The mom asked if that works. My sister said, 70% of the time. The dad asked what happens the other 30%. She said, "You get kicked into next week." They decided to skip the kangaroo section entirely. The mom asked if koalas were safer. My sister said, "Depends if they've had their coffee." The family went straight to the gift shop and left. Wrote a review saying the staff refused to take safety seriously. Another tourist replied saying that's just how Australians are. I work at a Hobart bookstore, and an American came in asking for books about Australian history. I showed him the section. He picked up a book about convict settlements and asked if Australians are embarrassed about being founded by criminals. I told him not really, but we don't talk about it much because of the shame laws. He asked what shame laws are. I said the government passed them in the 80s to protect national dignity. He asked if that's why Australian history isn't taught in American schools. I said probably. He asked what happens if you break the shame laws. I told him it's just a fine, but it goes on your record. He asked if tourists can break them. I said technically yes, but most people don't risk it. He asked what counts as breaking them. I said mainly bringing up the convict thing in public or asking Australians if they're descended from criminals. He apologized for asking. I said he's fine since we're in a bookstore, which is considered educational context. He bought 3 books and asked if reading them was legal. I said as long as he reads them privately. He looked genuinely nervous. My coworker asked what I told him. I said, the truth. She said, we don't have shame laws. I said, he doesn't know that. I bartended in Adelaide, and an American guy ordered a beer and asked if we have real Australian beer or just the export stuff. I told him we only serve the real stuff, but it's stronger because of the heat, so most tourists can't handle it. He said he'd be fine. I poured him a Carlton draft. He took a sip and said it tasted normal. I said, give it 15 minutes. He asked what happens then. I said the delayed effect kicks in because of how we brew it in outdoor tank. He asked if that's safe. I told him it's legal, but you have to sign a waiver after 3 drinks. He asked where the waiver was. I said we're out of forms, so he's technically drinking at his own risk. He looked nervous but kept drinking. After his second beer, he asked if he should stop. I said probably, unless he's used to altitude sickness, because the delayed fermentation affects oxygen levels. He asked how that's possible. I said, science, mate. He paid and left after 2 beers. Came back the next day completely fine and asked why nothing happened. I said, you got lucky. He posted online about Australian beer being no joke and how Americans should be careful. Got 4,000 likes. My cousin works at a Queensland surf shop. An American woman came in asking for a wetsuit to protect against jellyfish. He showed her the stinger suits. She asked if they actually work. He said mostly, but some jellyfish have learned to unzip them. She asked if he was joking. He said, I wish. She asked what people do about that. He said you just have to swim faster than the jellyfish, which isn't hard because they're slow. She asked if that's why Australians are good swimmers. He said it's survival of the fittest. She asked how common jellyfish attacks are. He said depends on the season, but during summer you see at least 2 or 3 people getting unzipped per day. She asked if anyone's died. He said not recently, but last year was rough. She bought the stinger suit and left. Never went in the water. Her husband came back later asking if any of that was true. My cousin said, what do you think? The guy said he genuinely couldn't tell. My cousin said, that's the Australian experience. I work at Sydney Airport Customs, and an American asked if he needed to declare emotional support items. I asked what kind. He said his Lucky Rock from Arizona. I told him rocks are actually prohibited because of contamination risk, and we'd have to confiscate it. He asked if I was serious. I said Australian soil is fragile, and foreign rocks can introduce minerals that disrupt the ecosystem. He asked if that's real. I said we had a whole incident in the 90s with imported gravel. He asked what happened. I said 3 beaches turned purple and had to be shut down. He asked if his rock would do that. I told him probably not, but we can't risk it. He asked what happens if he doesn't declare it. I said it's a $1,500 fine if the scanner picks it up. He declared it. I inspected the rock, then handed it back and said it looked safe. He asked if he could keep it. I said yeah, it's just sandstone, we have tons of that here. He asked why I made him declare it then. I said, procedure. He asked if I was messing with him. I said, did you learn something about biosecurity? He said yes. I said, then it wasn't a waste. He posted about Australian customs being intense but educational. Last summer, I worked at a Great Barrier Reef tour company, and this American couple signed up for snorkeling. Before we left, the husband asked if the reef fish bite. I said only if you're wearing yellow, because they think you're a rival fish. He asked if that's true. I said it's in the brochure. He checked the brochure. It wasn't there. I said, must be in the waiver you signed. He checked the waiver. Not there either. I said, weird, we usually include that. His wife asked what happens if fish bite you. I said it's mostly harmless, but some species carry bacteria that make you smell like fish for a week. She asked if that's curable. I said you just have to wait it out. The husband asked if I was joking. I said, mate, do I look like I'm joking? He said he couldn't tell. I said, welcome to Australia. They went snorkeling anyway. Both wore blue. Came back fine. The husband asked if the fish thing was real. I said, what do you reckon? He said he still didn't know. I told him that's the most Australian answer he'd give. He laughed and said he finally understood. His wife said she didn't understand anything that happened this trip. I said, yeah, that's normal. Australians don't try to confuse Americans. We just talk the way we talk, and Americans assume we're running some kind of elaborate con. We're not. We're just seeing if you're paying attention. If you believe a kangaroo needs an apology, that's on you. Got more stories where Americans tried to understand Aussie culture and failed spectacularly. Next time, we're covering the ones who argued with locals about Australian geography. You'll want to hear those.